Making your site both accessible and easy to use by people with disabilities is imperative. Our next speaker will teach us how to make the web a better place by designing experiences that are easy to use for everyone. He's the founder of Simply Accessible, and he's an authority on accessibility and web design. Please welcome Derek Featherstone.
So these three people sit down in the conference room. And Jake, the poor guy in the middle, is meeting with his design director and his VP of engineering. And he kind of gets raked over the coals for about an hour. And in that meeting, both Claire and Sanjay provide Jake with a whole bunch of feedback that has been shared with them over the last year. Their site launched about a year ago, and they've had all kinds of feedback come in from people. And the feedback wasn't really that good. There was lots of great feedback for certain things. It looked great, but there was a whole bunch of things that kind of came up that weren't that good. They work at a company called the IncrediWeb Company, and they're an incredible company, and they make themselves look fantastic. In fact, they make themselves look bigger than they really are, because if you look closely, you can see that they've actually cloned themselves, and there are multiple versions of the same person in there. I don't know how they do it, but we could all probably get a lot more done if we could find a way to do that. They work at this company, and they created this e-commerce store, and it was there was much fanfare with the launch, and everything went really well. Except for some things like this. And these are some samples of the feedback that they got and that they shared with Jake during that meeting. I'm really struggling to select a color for the shirt that I want. The buttons are too close together for me. I can't seem to change the size of the text. I'm trying to buy this, but I can't do it with my keyboard. I can't quite understand this video. There's too much background noise, and there's no captions. I'm having a tough time remembering what went wrong and how to fix it. The meeting didn't go very well. Jake was kind of visibly shaken, and he met with these three people, and they kind of decided, okay, after an hour, enough is enough. We need to part ways, and not like permanently, just we need to go our separate ways, and Claire and Sanjay are going to go off, and Jake is going to go off and kind of figure out what happens. Jake is kind of not all that happy. He sends a message. He jumps into Slack and he says to his team, hey, we've got some work to do. And of course, as always happens, the team kind of comes running. Sheldon comes, Amina comes, Parker comes, Jason comes, and Renata come. And they all get together and they start going through this, trying to figure out what they're going to do next, because they don't know. They've never really understood what all of that feedback was about, and they didn't understand who they were impacting when they were creating this site the way that they did. Every single one of those pieces of feedback that came through were pieces of feedback from people with disabilities. And their goal when they were building the site was to drive as much traffic as they could, to sell as many things as they could, to enable as many people to buy as they could. And they realized, based on this feedback, that they were actually not really serving their market very well. They had a number of people that made these kind of complaints and had these they'd submitted forms or they had done usability testing, and they had received all of this feedback, and they were really struggling to understand why and what was going on and where they missed the mark. So they decide to call for help. Jake says, we need to figure out what we're going to do here. And so Jake makes a pretty good plan. He says, you know, I need some assistance with this because ultimately I have no idea what I'm doing. He's kind of going through the motions, but he feels in a completely different environment than he's ever felt before, right? He is completely out of his element, out of his comfort zone, and he knows that he needs help. So he gets the team together, and they all decide, we need to take this to the next step, and we've got to kind of focus on this and figure out what happened. And so their first thing that they decided to do was to set a goal. And they talked with a whole bunch of different advisors. Jake has a mentor that works at another company, and he called that mentor and said, what do I do? I'm not even really sure where to begin here. And the mentor said, you really need to start with setting a goal and setting a benchmark for where you want to be. And one of the fundamental pieces of good guidance that the mentor gave to Jake was, you need to look at what level of expectation you're going to set within the company so that you can take this forward. And after talking with and doing a bunch of reading online, Jake said, I feel like everybody's expecting me to be perfect, and that everything that we do and that we publish and create on the web needs to be perfect from an accessibility perspective. And that feeling basically was paralyzing Jake. He didn't know what to do next. He didn't know where to start. They had a list of over 237 things that weren't correct from an accessibility perspective. So they knew that they weren't doing a good job. They knew that they had created the site, but they knew they weren't doing a good job from an accessibility perspective. And so one of the very first things that his mentor said to him was, you need to get this idea of being perfect out of your head. Right? We can't focus on being perfect. And you may see this. If you start to research accessibility and see what being accessible actually means, you will find, well, it's like anything on the internet. There's like people out there that basically will be condescending and put you down and basically make you feel like crap for not having done something that you didn't know about in a perfect way. That idea of accessibility needing to be perfect has all of these connotations that go with it. The idea behind something being perfect is that it's absolute, that it is finished, that you are completely done, there's no changes needed, and there's nothing more to do. And that makes people feel, and maybe you've felt this before, it makes people feel that being accessible is unachievable, that it's absolutely overwhelming and you don't know where to start. And this is how Jake was feeling. So his mentor kind of took him aside and said, let's put the idea of perfect out of your head. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with agile methodologies and using agile, but the idea behind agile and iteration is that we have this concept of a minimum viable product. And the minimum viable product means it meets all the requirements and functions, but we continue to iterate on it and make it better. We make these continuous improvements to it. And the idea behind that really focuses on, instead of the word perfect, focuses on the word better. In other words, we're always going to be striving for better. That creates this incredible feeling where a whole lot of pressure is removed from people, especially from an accessibility perspective. We've worked with loads and loads and loads of teams where they literally don't know where to start. And I'll give you an example in a moment. The idea of better versus perfect. Better is something that is relative. It's any type of improvement over some kind of previous state where you're showing progress, you're making things better, there's room to grow. And the idea of better means that you're never done. And I'd love for everybody to think that way about accessibility. We're never done. Our company, we focus on accessibility, and I've been doing accessibility work for almost 20 years, and I still learn new things every day. And that is incredibly empowering and liberating, because I know that I don't know everything, and I know that there's always more that I can learn. And so that feeling helps people kind of create this idea. What are the first things that we can do? What can we do? We know we can make some progress here. We can make things happen. And getting the idea in your head that starting with something is way better than just doing nothing. Jake and his team, for that course of that year since launch, they had kind of seen some of these pieces of feedback drip in. And they kind of did one of these. I don't know if you've done this before, but they would, let me put this down. They would take that piece of feedback that came in, and they would put it in one hand, and they would reach down and pick up a big carpet, and they would put it underneath there, and then they would put the rug back down, and they'd be like, nobody saw that, right? They want to get started. They've been ignoring the problem. They knew it was there, but they didn't know what to do about it, so they just put it under the carpet. So what we really wanted people to do from an accessibility perspective with almost everybody that we work with, and certainly what Jake and his team needs to do, is they need to start and they need to learn quickly. When you first get into accessibility, does anybody here actually specialize in accessibility? Anybody? No? Okay, good. Whew. I was kidding. Accessibility is something that is really very, very a huge passion of mine, something that I think is really, really important, that everybody can use the things that we create, regardless of what their abilities are. We create things and opportunities where we have a level playing field for everybody, regardless of what their, what their sight, how good their sight is, or how good their hearing is, or whether or not they can use a mouse effectively or not. Maybe they have, I don't know, my grandfather in the mid-1980s had a stroke, and he was never able to use his left hand properly again. So what would that mean for him if he was trying to use a computer? So we think of all these different people, and we're really ultimately designing for and building for our future selves. Right? We all age into disability. I don't know if you know this, but we're all getting older. There is this magical point. As you get older, more and more people, sort of a higher portion of a population has some type of a disability. And I think when you're under 10 years old, there's like 5% of the population that has a disability. And when you get into your 20s, the number grows. And when you get into your 30s and 40s, we start to hit like 25%. And there's this magic point at about somewhere between 74 and 78 years old, where it basically becomes a coin toss as to whether or not you yourself are going to have a disability or not. So 50% of the population that are at sort of that age of 74 to 78 have a disability. We are designing and building for our future selves. And we are setting a bar right now that enables other people and people that we are mentoring that are coming up through the ranks as junior people and interns. We are setting a bar for them that this is how things should be done so that everybody can use this. So we want the team to start and we want them to learn quickly. So let's think about what that actually means. One of the best things that you can do right away is to actually go and look to the standards. So there is a standard for accessibility, and this is what Jake needed to do. He went and he jumped in right away and he found WCAG, W-C-A-G, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, version 2. There's actually a version 2.1 that is kind of in the works as an update. Version 2 came out in December of 2008. And so even that feels like, in internet terms, that is like dinosaur era, right? Like that's from a long, long, long time ago. It's still very relevant. So Jake and his team jumped in and they started to look at the standard. And they decided arbitrarily, we're going to take these 20 things and we are going to try and fix them. And we're going to try and do that in a 1-week period. They're then going to use that week and the results of that week to figure out how quickly they can get the other 217 done. We worked with a team very recently that had over 220 issues, and their initial estimate on how long it was going to take to fix those things, 220 issues that we found in their site, their initial estimate was that it was going to take 2 developers full-time for 10 months. When they did this little 1-week exercise to go and see what they could fix, they revised their estimate based on what they had learned and what they were able to accomplish, that it was only going to take 3 months. Now, from a mental and psychological perspective, that second number is way, way more achievable than 2 people full-time for 10 months. So they took a baby step to get started, And that helped them understand and kind of feel good about what they had accomplished and good about accessibility. They knew they had a tricky road ahead because there was a lot of things that they needed to learn. But they were able to revise that estimate really quickly, and that really helped them get started. Interesting thing, though, that happens with accessibility, they kind of started researching and figuring out, well, how does this actually work? And how does this, so for people that don't know, if you're blind and you're using a computer, you generally use something called a screen reader, which will read the screen or the contents of the screen out to you. And you actively work with the content on the screen to say, this is the thing that I want now, tell me what that's all about. And so somebody using a screen reader might move through a website, and they will get to, say, a product page or an article page. They will use the H key on their keyboard to jump through the headings that are there so they can figure out what's on the page. And then when they find that thing, they will say, read this to me. And then they will read and listen to all that content. They can adjust the speed. They can make it read faster. They can make it read slower, depending on the experience that they're after and what they're trying to do. So somebody that uses a screen reader, excuse me, will use those kind of techniques. Now, what this team needed to do is they understood that some people use screen readers, but they didn't know anything about it. And so they started to fire up a screen reader. If you're on a Mac, you have a screen reader that's built in, and it's called VoiceOver. If you're on Windows, you have a screen reader built in called Narrator, and there are other screen readers that are available as well. So you can use these things to explore what happens when you're looking at an interface without actually seeing it. So they started to explore screen readers, and they discovered that there was actually a lot more to it than they thought there was. They started to find answers, and then they realized that they thought they had answers, but they really ended up with many, many, many more questions. Because as soon as they started to go down that rabbit hole of how does this particular screen reader work, they really began to understand that there's so much different behavior in terms of how one screen reader works versus another. What do we need to care about? What do we not need to care about? It's kind of the equivalent of thinking about, well, we need to make our site work in Internet Explorer, in Edge, in Firefox, in Chrome, and in Safari, and Opera, and put all of those things together, and we need to build things that work in all of those. And so they kind of took the same approach to screen readers and how that would work. Their eyes were completely opened to all kinds of different assistive technologies. So they found screen readers. One of the people, Parker, on the web team, on Jake's team, actually has a friend that has low vision. And so instead of using a screen reader, he uses a screen magnifier. So think of looking at the screen at any given time and then just blowing it up so that you can see a small portion of it. So they started to understand a lot more about all the different assistive technologies that were out there, and they realized that they had a lot more that they needed to understand than what they currently did. The next step that they took was, after they set that goal and kind of did that initial research, was they created a more significant research plan and way to move forward. So that web team engaged with a whole bunch of different people with disabilities. They knew they had issues, but they didn't really know in enough detail what they were. So that feedback that they got before that said, hey, I'm really having trouble, these buttons are too close together, I can't choose a color for the shirt, or I can't buy this because I can't do it with a keyboard. They didn't know enough about why those things were happening. Right? So they needed to dive in a little bit more and find out why. And the best way to do that was to engage a whole group of people with disabilities. Now, this wasn't something that they could do immediately. This took time. Jake's team reached out to a whole bunch of local advocacy groups. And you have local advocacy groups here. Wherever you live, you have local advocacy groups. We have in Canada, we have the CNIB, which is the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. There are local chapters. There's a national organization. Here in the US, you have the National Federation for the Blind, and you have local chapters for them. You have groups that support people with autism and their families. We have the National Federation for the Deaf. here in the US. There are loads and loads and loads of local and national level advocacy groups that can help you find people with disabilities so that you can actually I know this is ridiculous. You're not going to believe this, but you could actually just talk to people that use your site, and if some of them have disabilities, you will learn incredible things. And I know that's like nobody outside this room understands that, and I know you guys all do, but there's a lot of really great detail that you can get just from working with people with disabilities, trying to complete actions on your site. Another great source for working with people with disabilities is local universities and colleges. Almost every single university or college has a center for students with disabilities or some type of office for students with disabilities. One of their mandates is often employment. And so one of the things that you can do, and we do this with our teams all the time, the clients that we work with, we find people at local colleges and universities, and we work with them, and we offer them somewhere between $75 and $125 on a gift card or something like that, as basically really a true token of appreciation and some compensation for them spending an hour time with us. You learn a whole lot in like 5 hours. You would be amazed at how much you can learn about accessibility. We can do that with people without disabilities as well, but the things that you learn from working with people with disabilities is really quite stunning. So they worked with this entire group of people. Did you see that? Did you see what they did there? That's what research looks like. That was research when they move like that. So I need to, that's research. The reason that we want to do research is because we can do all the testing that we want to in the world, but until you see how somebody actually uses something in the real world, you're biased. Every single person in here, at least my assumption is that we are all nerds. We are all power users. When we compare ourselves to people that are out there that we are building things for, we are way more technically advanced. And even those of you that are in here that don't feel you're as technically advanced, you're still way more technically advanced than the people that you're usually building things for. I want you to take a look at this. This is an example of something that kind of it blew my mind. This is something that you wouldn't see until you actually, or you wouldn't believe it until you actually see people trying to use this escalator. So I want you to envision right here, this is 3 floors in a mall. And right now, this perspective is we're on the top floor. And I want you to envision this one on the right-hand side, this escalator is going down, okay? And you want to go from the top floor all the way to the bottom floor. Which escalator are you going to go on? After you go down that one, which one are you going to go on to go down to the next level? The one right next to it. And if you want to be on the bottom floor and come up to the top, you're going to start down on here on this one, you're going to come up and then come up the other way. Let's watch and see what happens. Now, apart from this being just completely intuitively wrong to every single person in this room, we often look at things when we use them in real life and we think, hey, this is no big deal, right? If we tried to have 2 or 3 people on the top floor and 2 or 3 people on the bottom floor, trying to get to the people on the top, trying to get to the bottom, the people on the bottom trying to get to the top, if we had 2 or 3 people doing that, does this work? It's not great, but it's passable. But I want you to think of the scenario where we have 100 people on the top floor, 100 people on the bottom floor, and then let's add in 200 people on the middle floor that are trying to go either up or down. This completely falls apart in that scenario, because as you come down this escalator, in order to go down to the next level, you have to cross over the stream of people that are going up this one and coming here. So we have all of these streams of people crossing one another, and it becomes completely unusable and a massive escalator traffic jam. When we test these scenarios, we want to kind of do that in an extreme way. That's one of the things that I love about doing work with people with disabilities is we put our designs and code under tremendous stress. Think of it as another way of stress testing the work that you have created. If you think of people's abilities, and you think of everybody's ability is kind of on a scale, right? If you think of a scale, and if you're familiar with biology or statistics at all, you know that if you look at a characteristic like height, for example, you will have very few people that are like really, really short, and very few people that are really, really tall, and most people are somewhere in between. And so we talk about that in biology terms or mathematical terms. We talk about that as being a normal distribution or a standard distribution, where most people are within 2 standard deviations of the mean. This is getting way too, like I think feel like I'm in university again right now, but where we have people that are kind of at extreme levels, but the number of people with that particular characteristic is small. And most people are kind of here around this average. One of the things that I believe really passionately is that if you design for people that are at both extremes, you kind of take care of everybody in the middle as well. And so one of the ideas, and think about this, that range, instead of being height, think of it as sight. Maybe color vision. I have no color vision, or I have perfect color vision, right? Everybody's kind of somewhere in between. I have no distance vision, or I have perfect distance vision. I have no close-up vision or perfect close-up vision. Many people with vision-related issues, they might have no central vision. So somebody that has glaucoma or cataracts, the central part of their vision is blocked, but they have some peripheral vision. So they might have no central vision, and somebody might have perfect central vision. By the same token, somebody might have perfect central vision and no peripheral vision. So no peripheral vision and perfect peripheral vision. So everybody's kind of on some scale there in between those extremes. So when we design for people at the extremes, we tend to take care of everybody in the middle. Now, we're going to do this quick example. So I'd like everybody to take their left hand or their right hand, and I want you to hold it up. And you know it's dark, so I can't see you, so just be honest with this and do this, because I can't tell if you actually all have your hands up. Now, hold on to a straw. I'm making a tiny straw. Not a big milkshake straw, but a little tiny coffee stir stick type straw. And I want you to hold that up and then close your other eye, look through the straw at the screen, and close or cover your other eye. Now, there's nothing on the screen right now for you to see, so you can put your straws down for a second. That was just like a practice run. What I'm going to do is to reveal an interface for you. And what I'd love for you to do is to look through the straw at the interface with the other eye closed. I want you to figure out what the thing is about. And then I want you to go through, I'll give you one hint. It's a form that you need to fill out. Excuse me. It's a form that you need to fill out. And I want you to fill out that form while you're looking through the straw. And keep in mind, this is an example of the kinds of things that we see when we're actually testing in the real world with people with disabilities. So, I'm about to reveal the interface. Straws up, other eye closed. As I reveal it, orient yourself to the form, and then go through the motion of filling it out. And while you're doing that, I'm going to take a photo of you. Now, there should be a number of things that you noticed about this form, right? What was the motion that you needed to go through to fill that out? Back and forth, left and right, left and right, left and right. Now, what we were doing by looking through the straw is simulating low vision. Not some particular type of low vision, but just in general, limiting our field of view. Someone that has low vision can't see the entire screen at once, right? So they may have, like what we were doing there is kind of limiting our peripheral vision. So we have good central vision, and we can only see a small portion of the screen at once. Probably if you're looking through that, looking through the straw at that screen, you might have been creating something that was effectively limiting yourself to see maybe 10% of the screen at once, or maybe even less than that, okay? So what ended up happening was you were creating an effect that was like this. And so somebody that uses, or somebody that has low vision very often is using a magnifier. I mentioned that before. So that magnifier means that you're only seeing about this much of the screen at once. And when we're focused on these questions, or these answers, the questions are usually completely out of sight, or at least in this example they were, because they were in these multiple columns. What we have done by creating this grouping where we have two questions together and two sets of answers together is effectively the same thing as those escalators, right? The things that should be together aren't together. So when we're looking at the question and we get over to the answer, we kind of lose track of which question we were actually on. We really need the question and answer to be together so that they are grouped properly together. The other thing that happened, we created that, you said you were kind of going that left to right pattern, right? So we're on the question, we move over to the answers, back to the left to the next question, to the right, to the left, to the right, to the left, to the right. What's your next move? To the left, where we have exactly the least desirable call to action that we wanted. You also probably got to the point where when you were scrolling over and kind of moving over to that spot on the screen, you had kind of a muscle memory. You knew how far to go over, right? The next thing that we see is our second least favorable call to action. And this was all just with a thing that looked like a really simple, straightforward design. And yet it was very difficult for someone with low vision to use. We tested this in the real world, and this worked reasonably well for a screen reader user. It was coded well, but the design didn't work well for somebody with low vision, someone with a limited view of what was on the screen. So that's effectively what we're doing by looking through the straws. We're simulating some type of low vision, not really specific, any particular condition or anything, but that's what we're simulating. So you know that these things are not grouped well, right? Those things should be grouped together, just like the escalators should be grouped together, so that we have those two escalators working together and we don't have to cross the streams. You know what I'm saying. The other thing that happened in that interface is that we had the three buttons, and the three buttons all looked almost visually identical. From a design perspective, we say they have the same visual weight, right? They're all the same shape, they're all the same size, they all have basically words on them, they're the same color. So for somebody that has maybe blurred vision or low vision, distinguishing between those buttons might be actually quite tricky. They have to read in order to be able to distinguish them from one another. And for someone that has difficulty reading because they have low vision, that can be quite a challenge. So we want to change this interface and we're going to transform it. So here's what we need to do. We're going to take this and we're going to, this is my favorite part. See, that's what I was hoping for. I'm really kind of sad that only 3 people did that. I'm going to take a page from Corey's book here. Let's try that again. That was so much better. Thank you. Coming from Canada, that's kind of more what I expect, you know? We have a completely different layout that works really well for many reasons. One of them is we've got the right things grouped together. Question and answer, question and answer, question and answer, question and answer. Yeah? We've also done something with this that creates, so we've got the right chunks, but we've also created the right path. We're creating a path that leads the person exactly to where we want to lead them. So if you take a look at this, and straws up, fill this form out. Do you feel the difference? You see how much faster you got through that one? I know some of you are still doing it. I didn't mean to like imply anything. You were all faster though. You were all faster. We created exactly the right pathway. We're never, even if we magnify this, we're never going to completely eliminate left to right scrolling, because you might have a longer question and it might bleed off the edge. You might actually be in a situation where you want to not allow that to be a really super long line length and just make sure that the line length is less so that you can keep it all in one screen. But this creates a path directly to that call to action. And then we've done some other things with this that help distinguish those calls to action from one another, so that somebody with low vision, or anybody else for that matter, can actually distinguish between them. And if we do this because it helps people with low vision, it actually kind of helps everybody else as well. These are the kinds of things that we find when we're doing real testing with people with disabilities. Right? We find it with people without disabilities as well, but we often find these really interesting nuggets when we're testing a site with people with disabilities. That thing that we're doing there, by the way, is called the straw test. We kind of created that because it really helps you simulate what it might be like to have low vision. We use this on wireframes, we use it on mock-ups, we use it on live sites. We use it all the time to kind of create these things to show you opportunities to improve that design. This comes on a set of cards that we're building. It's like an inclusive design set of cards. So if you want more detail about that, ping me later. We're kind of getting ready to launch about 18 of them that basically help you make your designs more inclusive. We find out things when we're working with people with disabilities that we didn't really expect before. So this gentleman, you can see this is a really kind of interesting keyboard. It's very different. There's a number of things that I hope you notice about it. One of them is that it's upright. This gentleman types not with his hands and not with his voice. He types using a mouth wand. Do you see the curvature of the keyboard? See how it's slightly concave? What that means is if he needs to type the word always, A is on the left-hand side of the keyboard, L is on the right-hand side, the W is on the left-hand side, the A is on the left-hand side, the Y is up in the middle, and the S is back on the left-hand side. In order to move his head around on a flat keyboard, he would have to move his head a lot to try and touch those those keys with his mouth wand. But because it's slightly curved, he can just kind of rotate his head a little bit more naturally to be able to type. It's brilliant. What do you notice about the keys themselves and the layout of the keys? Very condensed, yeah? Jam-packed. On the keyboards that we might use on our desktop computer, there's usually, here's all the letter keys, and then there's function keys, and then there's these other keys that are a number pad, and all these other things that are kind of off to the side. Do you see a space bar? Yeah. So his space bar is 2 keys tall, and it's right in the middle at the bottom, and it's vertical rather than horizontal, because that makes it, I'm going to throw out a number, 52 times more usable for him. I don't know the actual number. Like 73% of all statistics are made up. So, but he can use this. Now, this is a gentleman who is doing everything, and that feedback that Jake and his team got was, I'm trying to buy this, but I can't do it with the keyboard. There are some fundamental things wrong in that design that they created, and we figured out why. They figured out why. Jake and his team figured out why. They looked back in history, and they found out that Jason was the junior programmer on the team that came in and that didn't know anything about accessibility. And and didn't understand that somebody needed to be able to do this with the keyboard. And so he created, poor Jason, I feel bad for Jason. Is anybody here named Jason? I'm like outing you right now, I'm sorry. Not for real, but I feel like I'm picking on you without actually picking on you. Jason created a set of custom radio buttons and checkboxes that looked gorgeous, but they didn't work with a keyboard. And so somebody that was using a keyboard wasn't able to actually get through that buying process just using the tools that they have. This gentleman couldn't use a mouse. Here's another example. This keyboard this one, it blew my mind the first time I saw this one. What do you notice about the keys? They're inset, right? They're not like raised keys. They're actually inset down. There's a guard that goes right over top of them. What about the spacing? Way spread out. That's a big keyboard. It's like 2.5 times the size of the other gentleman's keyboard. He needed the keys really condensed. This woman needs the keys really spread out. That guard that's on top helps her rest her arm. She has very, very low arm strength. Very low arm strength. To the point where typing is a difficult thing for her. She can't, most of us, did anybody take touch typing? Did anybody take typing class in high school? Oh, thank you. I feel, yes. Hands up, right? You had to keep your wrists up and your elbows we're all like this now and like hunched over but we were taught type like this. She would never be able to type like that. She doesn't have the arm strength to keep her arms up and her wrists elevated for extended periods of time. We were but keyboard monkeys. That's what I feel like sometimes. So it's gone. Thank you. So she needs that guard so that she can rest her arm on the keyboard and kind of guide where she's going to put it. And there's each one of those keys really just requires a really light touch. It's not like an actual physical keyboard where she has to push down the key. It's more like a touch screen, so she can just kind of tap on it lightly. Right? She has the ability to use a mouse, but it's really kind of challenging for her. She can use it if she needs to. She has a trackpad that she uses often. She was the one that was really struggling to select a color because the buttons were too close together. She has very difficult time because of her arm strength issues. She has a difficult time hitting targets that are really close together or that are really small because she doesn't have stability, right? So as she's getting there, she might even start to feel, really to the point where her arm starts to shake because it's difficult for her to hold her arm up. And because those radio buttons for the colors weren't, they weren't keyboardable, she couldn't use the keyboard to get to them, and they were stacked right on top of one another, and so she was trying to use the mouse, and she couldn't do it. She was trying to hit one color, and she kept hitting the other one. The two targets were way too close together. I can't seem to change the size of the text. Who might need that? You didn't know this was going to be interactive. I was going to quiz you the whole time, did you? Who needs to bump up the font size? Yeah. Anybody in here need to bump up the font size? Oh, come on, some of you. I am 100% willing to admit I have video evidence on my phone because I forget to delete photos of all the things that I've had to take photos of so that I could blow it up and read it, like medicine bottles and all of that stuff. Like I've got so many of those on my phone because I'm getting older and my eyes just don't work the same way anymore, right? I need to bump up the font size in my browser all the time. And when we lock things down and don't account for that flexibility, sometimes we bump up the font size, and what ends up happening is that some of the pieces of text slide underneath other pieces of text or other elements on the page, and you can't actually read all the content anymore. So one of the things that we need to be able to do is to resize that text. Very important for people with low vision, whether it's really pronounced low vision or just like a little bit of low vision. I can't quite understand this video. There's too much background noise and no captions. Who do you think said that? Yeah, this was a person that was hard of hearing. They weren't completely deaf, but they were having trouble distinguishing the foreground noise from the background noise. And there was no captions to help them along the way. This is a pretty significant accessibility issue. I'm having a tough time remembering what went wrong and how to fix it. How many of you have seen pages, and this is what Jake and his team built. They would submit a form through the checkout path, and they would show all the errors, and then after a certain amount of time, the error messages would disappear. You've seen that before, right? People do that all the time. They're like, oh, this is cool. I saw this on Stack Overflow. I got this code. I'm going to take that. I'm going to put it in there. And all my error messages show up, and then they disappear and fade into the background. Someone that has memory-related issues is going to struggle with that because they won't be able to remember what the issues were maybe and how to fix them. These are all things that you find out when you're doing usability testing or even just talking with and doing walkthroughs with people with disabilities. So there's a lot that you can do, and there's a lot that the team actually looked at. So when we take this a step further and we look at what to do next, I want you to think about this. Talk about people and get help. That's what Jake and his team needed to do. And they created a prioritized remediation plan. And they started with this: keyboard issues, image and media issues, and forms issues. And there was a really good reason why. Because the person that Jake called was actually me. And we were able to look at our data from the last 4 years of doing assessments for clients all over the world. We were able to look and see that of all of the issues that we had, like literally thousands, we often find, we'll work with clients and they'll see big numbers. Like we'll find 700 issues and they were hoping for like 15. And so we'll find 700 issues that they need to address. And so we have thousands and thousands of pieces of data, and we have found that things that are related to these three things, three very simple web standards, things that everybody should just be doing: making things work with the keyboard, providing appropriate text equivalents for images and other media, and making sure that your forms are done perfectly. That stuff accounted for 60 to 70% of the issues that we have found. 60 to 70%. And this keyboard images and forms represents a very small portion of all of the accessibility guidance that's out there. But if you start with these things, it actually helps you make significant impact right away. Almost, well, there's lots of different reasons, but making sure that everything works with a keyboard is really not just for people that have mobility challenges. You saw the gentleman that was using the mouth wand. It's not just for him. Somebody that uses a screen reader, they need to use the keyboard for everything because they can't see the mouse cursor. So they need the keyboard for everything. Somebody that has mobility or dexterity challenges might use voice recognition software. So they will command the computer by speaking to it. Almost all of that software is keyboard emulation. It emulates the functions of a normal keyboard. So almost everything, I would say not almost everything, but almost every type of disability out there has a really good case for keyboard usage, which is why we almost always start with it first. The web team was feeling pretty good, and they finally got to the point where they called back in Claire and Sanjay. And they said, what do we need to do next here? Like, we found all these things, we have a plan on what we're going to fix, but let's talk about how this kind of becomes, something that we can justify from a prioritization perspective. We always say keyboard images, media, and forms, but what if there's 100 keyboard issues? How do you even decide within that? So we got the business team in, and we talked about these kinds of things in terms of prioritizing. Talk about highest business value. For most e-commerce platforms, the highest business value is found in two things. One, the actual checkout part, where you're like, give me the money. And the second part is the actual product page itself. If you can't select a product, then who cares about checkout? So those two things generally have the highest business value. So this should be no surprise to you, but a keyboard issue that is part of the product page or the checkout flow is much more important than a keyboard issue that's found on an FAQ page. Right? The FAQ page keyboard issue is still critically important for somebody that needs that help. But in terms of prioritizing, the higher business value goes to the checkout flow and the payment form and the product page. Does that make sense? High impact things with low complexity. We're looking for simple fixes that have a high impact. So keyboard stuff often falls in that range. What about highest risk? Right? The highest risk pages might be specific pages that you are sending a big marketing or you created a big marketing campaign and you're sending loads of people to this page. Right? What if you had you were sending people to a URL where they sign up for something, and you had I think this is the right wording because I'm not an ad agency kind of person, but we have a significant ad spend to send people to that URL. Is that right? Ad spend? Does that sound right? I don't know. I just make stuff up sometimes. It sounded good. But if we spend a lot of money to send people to a specific page, we want to make sure that that one is accessible because that's a higher risk. We're sending people to it kind of on purpose. And then we also look for the business side of things. Can we solve other problems too? Right? Almost every company that we work with is like, well, one of the biggest problems that we have is standardization. Jake and his team had that problem. They had 4 different versions of a date picker. They used accessibility to kind of solve that date picker standardization problem. They said, well, we need to have one accessible date picker. This is the one that we use, and no others. So beyond that, we need to think about creating your standard. So we get all those priorities, and then we set this out and say, let's create our standard. So our team, the web team, is going to create their standard. And what that really means is, you've looked at all the possibilities out there. You might find, this is one of the beautiful things about the web, is that there are so many different ways to solve the same problem. So you can use native radio buttons, you can use custom radio buttons, you can do something else entirely. But that decision on how you're going to do things is a standard for you and your teams. So what we want people to do is to take this step. Jake said, here's what we want to do to make this sustainable long run. The standard that we're going to create is always going to evolve so that it's constantly getting better. Right? We're never aiming for perfection. We're always aiming for better. This is the way that we do things, and we're going to document those things in our pattern libraries, our style guides, and our design systems. Accessibility needs to be built into those things. We're also going to make sure that we're using this and following these ideas for onboarding. One of the problems with those radio buttons was that it was a new junior programmer that had come in and they didn't get any accessibility in their onboarding at all. It needs to be part of everything. I'm going to share these with you really, really quickly, but these are kind of an example of how to attack this. When you're setting your standard, you might say, here are our top 5 keyboard things that we're going to do. Right? There's going to be 20, 30, 100 different keyboard things that you're going to say that these are the way that we do things, but you need to kind of chunk it down and start small. So we might start with these 5. Right? We want to make sure that all interactive elements can be reached with the tab key. That when you can tab to those interactive elements, they can actually be seen in a predictable and logical order. That when we get focus on them, we can actually use them with the keyboard. That the focus indicator, you know what I mean by the focus indicator? In Chrome and WebKit browsers, you see the little blue outline as you're tabbing through something. And Internet Explorer and Firefox, it's a little dotted line. That is a visible focus indicator, and that needs to be visible at all times. Someone that is using the keyboard because they can't use a mouse, but they can see the screen, they need to know where they are at any given time. So that focus indicator is kind of a critical piece. And then tab index, when it's used, is basically never set higher to 0. So it can either be 0 or -1, but it shouldn't be anything higher than that. Now, those are things that Jake and his team looked at, and they said, these are some rules that we can implement right away to make a huge change in how we're approaching things. You could take these, and I'm not saying take these and make them your only thing that you do, but you should take these and start thinking about what this actually means to your practice. From an images and media perspective, all images and media have to have text equivalents in the form of alt text, captions, or transcripts, and they have to convey the equivalent meaning as the image or media itself. Decorative images, for example, things that don't really give any meaning to the page, should have null alt attributes, so alt equals quote, quote, or their CSS background images. Informative images, those are images that have content. They are described with a text equivalent. Informative images with adjacent, this is a complex one, but informative images with adjacent content that's exactly the same should have alt equals quote, quote on it. Right? Because the idea is if you have, we sometimes link a title and say a book cover or something, and the book alt text is the name of the book. So it'll say The Martian, and then the text underneath it also says The Martian. So the link, when a screen reader user gets to it, it'll say link, The Martian, The Martian. And you really don't, well, I mean, that sounds kind of cool actually. But you don't want it to be repetitive. So you really want that to say just link The Martian. So they don't both need to have the same text. And then functional images, image buttons, links with image content, they use alt text to describe their purpose. This is a great starting point for you. Last bit, forms top 5. Text labels are marked up using the label element and 4 ID attributes. Form labels are clear and informative. Required fields are programmatically indicated to assistive technology. Forms are not automatically submitted, and users can prevent and correct errors with ease. So we take all of that and we use that as our starting point, and then we hit this. We make a commitment to the future. This team, oh, that's pressure. This team made this commitment to the future, that they're going to continue to evolve their patterns and guides and systems. They said, we're going to study things that we don't know about. We're going to do a dedicated accessibility sprint every quarter where the entire team focuses just on accessibility and addressing some of the things that have been there in the backlog in terms of things that need to be done. And they're going to include people with disabilities in the process through ideation, through design, and even through building and usability testing. That team came together, and they did an incredible job. Jake was very happy. Claire and Sanjay were also very happy that they saw all this progress. Right? It could have been a story of doom and gloom, where they did nothing, but they chose to make some small steps. And those are the kinds of things that I'd like you to think about. The creator of the web has said this from the very beginning. The power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. That should inspire you and make you realize the incredible impact that you can have to create a level playing field for everybody with the things that you create. Think about this. Please take that forward. And remember, not perfect, but always better. Thank you very much.